So from the individual perspective of one car manufacturer, we're now going to go macro and talk about why exponential mobilization of leading companies and countries is needed indeed to speed up change and to win the clean economy. So let's move on and talk about this. With me I have Johan Falk. You are CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and you're next to me here in the studio. And on Zoom, I have two prominent guests. I have Catherine McKenna, and it's wonderful to have Catherine McKenna here on Zoom with us. She is CEO Climate and Nature Solutions and former Minister of Environment and Climate from Canada. So warm welcome to you, Catherine McKenna. And also next to her on our Zoom screen here, we have Johan Rockström, Professor in Environmental Science and Director of Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Wonderful to have you with us here, Johan Rockström.
Yeah,
so I'm turning now first in this panel to Johan Falk here. Why is it so important to mobilize companies and countries at this point in time when it comes to implementing transition plans and scale up climate solutions? Also, of course, to phase out the fossil fuels. Why is this crucial right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, we have a common mission to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. We bring together some of the leading transformative and disruptive companies on the planet, and we require all of them to disclose high integrity transition plans and assessing them. What it means practically is halving value chains emissions by 2030 towards net zero by 2040, which is about the energy and material transformation and fossil phase out. It's also about scaling up climate solutions and contributing to climate action in society. And a big part of them are reasonably well on track, the first step, but they will not succeed unless we don't accelerate the green demand. So we really need strong NDCs also backed by transition plans from countries for every sector, because these two have to come together to win.
Thank you, Johan Falk. Turning now to Johan Rockström, could you please give us a short run through of the state, the health of the planet, and also, of course, your views on how strong corporate and national plans and how these connect to solving this problem?
Well, we know that it's really important to recognize that we met in 2009 to solve this problem and failed. 6 years later, we celebrated the Paris Agreement in 2015, the framework to hold global mean temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. The science since then shows that this is a critical limit to avoid crossing irreversible tipping points. Have we made progress? The answer is, unfortunately, at the aggregate level, no. So we are today on a very steep slope. We have only 4 or 5 years to cut global emissions by half. It's a 7.5% reduction per year to have any chance of holding the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit open. It means that for next year, in 2025, task number 1 is the following: to remove 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the global economy. That is nothing else but exponential. And of course, policy is absolutely essential here, but so is finance, and so is business, and so is particularly innovation. And I just want to put the finger on one thing now that we have a new Trump administration in the US. We have this sense of backing down on ambitions. One thing we've learned is the following: the only way to really go fast, to really scale at an exponential pace, is not only that we get the right policies in place and the right investments in place, it has to come out as being a winning strategy. It has to be something that citizens feel is better than the previous way of transporting yourself, a way of consuming, a way of building. And that is what the Exponential Roadmap really is about, to align with science through innovation, but also come out as the winner in the other end. And I think that is what we have to focus on and communicate, because we have all the empirical evidence that this is possible to do.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Johan Rockström. And turning now to Catherine McKenna, you have worked as a minister in Canada, and you've also been chair of the UN High-Level Expert Group, which is urging for exactly this, for high-level, high-integrity transition plans. So drawing from your experience, Catherine McKenna, what are your reflections on what you just heard here from Johan Falk and from Johan Rockström on the opportunity to align the corporate plans and the national transition plans?
Well, it's great to be on, and it's great to be with the two Johans. So look, it's critically important. As Johan Rockström just said, like, we don't have time. We need exponential change. And the reality is we have the solutions and we know how serious the crisis is. But when I was minister, I'll give one example. We needed to bring in a price on pollution, carbon pricing, because if it's free to pollute, you will have more pollution. And that is something that's transformative. But I needed to show to Canadians that it wasn't just environmentalists that supported me, that business supported me. So I created a carbon pricing leadership coalition with leading businesses who stepped up and said, this is actually good for my business, because it will make it cheaper for me to choose less polluting solutions. And I think what Johan says is really important. We need folks to step up, but it can't be, you know, if a business steps up, they're going to do less well. And so we did a report with a high-level expert group 2 years ago to the UN Secretary General. I chaired it. It was called Integrity Matters. So there's a price of admission. You say you're going to be net zero. It's not about 2050, although you need a 2050 target, but you need to be doing the work now. And we set out the criteria, which is, you know, good companies are doing this. We did a progress report this year with the UN Secretary General, where we brought together key actors, so from the private sector, and they showed that, you know, it's no longer an excuse to say that you can't move faster on the climate crisis because it's too difficult or too expensive. But the reality is not everyone is actually implementing this. And this is where you need government and companies working together. So next year is critical. We do need to see more ambitious climate plans, but with details from governments, because business needs certainty. They need to see where the market is going. And that can happen, and governments can provide that. But at the same time, the Secretary General at our event was clear, we need to see new ambitious transition plans to 2030 next year from companies. They need to step up and say what they're doing, because you want an ambition loop. You want governments to be setting the stage, how do we move forward? And then you want companies to be leading the way. And one thing I will say, because obviously there's a lot of focus on Trump, at our event, we had Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, but I was at another event with California. They're all in. And so you cannot stop the energy transition. The question is, how do we get the exponential change that we need right now? And we need governments to regulate and step up and provide, you know, the policy that is necessary. And we need businesses to scale both action and money.
Thank you very much, Catherine McKenna. And Johan Rockström, just a few days ago, you co-published an op-ed in one of the leading newspapers in Sweden, Dagens Nyheter, where you mentioned policy diffusion. Can you please tell us about this and how this relates to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so, you know, it comes out of a rising recognition of that speed and scale are the only currencies that count. So social tipping points and social contagion is something we have to understand better. What is it that makes us go exponential in terms of system change, not at the local level, not at the national level, but at the regional to the global level? And we focus a lot on you know, Roger Everett's 1962 theory of the diffusion of innovation and the cutting point of when you penetrate an innovation up to 20% of markets, you can actually tip over the 80% passive part of the market. So this is the innovation pathway. But there's increasingly evidence also to show that you can have the same kind of spillover effects on policies, where good examples of transparent, objective, effective policymaking in one economy can be reference points and poster childs for behaviors that then can spill over. And one very classic example, of course, is look at the European emission trading scheme. Where does that whole idea of cap and trade on a market-based cap, where you put a cap on emissions and then you basically have a market-based system? Well, it came from California. And it was a policy diffusion from one part of the world, which then spilled over into a completely different part of the world. I mean, we could have chosen simple carbon taxing as was done in the Nordics, for example. So this idea of learning from each other, which suggests the following, that even if you're in a small economy in the world, even if you are in Switzerland or in Colombia or in Finland or in Vietnam, you can actually have a disproportionately large influence today because everything is shaking. We are in the midst, as Catherine points out, we're in the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel-driven global economy. The question is not whether we will phase off coal, oil, and gas. The only question today is, will we be too late? Will we be too late for this to have unmanageable outcomes? And we're in the midst of this gauntlet. This is the transition phase. 150 years of powering in one way is to be replaced by another way. Of course, this is messy. And in this messiness, everyone is looking for the good examples. So you can be a leader today if you are, in Sweden or in New Zealand, in Germany or in China. I mean, the scale, I think we're focusing too much on the size of emitters. I think we should look more at the size of cleverness and innovation and novelty, and looking at that also when it comes to policies is equally important as innovation of technologies.
Thank you, Johan Rockström. This is truly inspiring, and I hope politicians are listening. I'm sure they will be, because this is really sizes and all in this. It's really the great examples that are important. So, Catherine McKenna, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, look, Johan is 100% right. In Canada, actually, when we had a government that was going back on climate, it was our provinces that stepped up and put a price on pollution, did a bunch of other things, methane regulations, a bunch of things that we were able to build on as a federal government when we came in. We saw this when Trump won, became the first time. We saw states really step up, as well as businesses, investors, cities and regions. But I think that we did, so as part of the Integrity Matters process, our 10th recommendation, we only had 10, was you need to regulate. And so there was a policy task force, a net zero policy task force that I'm part of. And it did a report this year, and it actually showed that there's a lot of policy innovation going on. Its focus this year was actually just do a comprehensive look at policy in the net zero space. I think the next agenda is to do, and Johan is always so smart, because I think what we need to do is the Integrity Matters, like our task force, needs to be working with the policy task force and look at examples of where policy innovation or diffusion has made a difference in the real economy, and what can we learn from that. So what is it when you see, say, like IKEA, who is really a leader? They've been able to demonstrate that you can both grow and reduce your emissions and make money. That's what we need to be showing, that you can decouple emissions from growth, ideally, because that's for governments as well as businesses. I think we need to see what is the interaction and what is really making the big exponential difference. I agree with Johan. I only care about scale and speed, and we don't have time. So when people tell me about their net zero 2050 targets, I don't really care. I'm like, what are you doing right now? Are your emissions going down? Is your money going up to clean? Do you have the right incentives in place? Are you lobbying for positive climate action from your government and policy that you need to actually do what you can do? And are you doing things that other people can learn from? So I think that there's actually a huge opportunity in this space, but it requires thinking a bit differently. For environmentalists, I think that we need to be more strategic in really figuring out, okay, what makes the big difference and what can people build on, and where can we learn from unusual suspects? I was always scavenging on the good ideas globally and locally in Canada to be able to do more on climate.
Thank you, Catherine McKenna. So Johan Falk, scavenging and speed and scale, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we can talk about exponential policies as well. Basically, I think there is an opportunity to actually identify and scale winning policies, the vital few, not overcomplicated. You can easily see, let's say Norway, for example, how did they achieve 90%? It's about relative pricing. It's about providing particular incentives, so that these type of strategies could be copied. So I think there could be work there on actually scaling policies much faster.
Thank
and
you.
Going for the vital few policies.
So all three of you, your thoughts on how we can go from sharing of burdens perspective to more an exponential race. Can you add any more perspectives, any more layers to this? Johan Rockström?
Yeah, I think this is really challenging, that your point about sharing burdens. I mean, I think one of the big breakthrough challenges we have is how do we make the phase out of coal, oil and gas, the whole mitigation agenda, a winning agenda also for the global south, a winning agenda for the weakest economies in the world. And because today we are at this unnecessary defense line between those who are perceiving themselves rightly as victims of climate change and therefore sitting in a state of inertia, when we need to get all economies on board this innovation pathway. And I think the only way to succeed with that is to add one element to the discussion we have here. So far we've discussed about scale and speed through innovation, solutions that give better outcomes. But we also need to de-risk investment. And of course that comes to the whole Baku discussion on finance. But in my view, finance cannot only be about compensating for loss and damage. Finance must be about de-risking innovations towards the new economy of tomorrow. And I think that storyline, unfortunately, is still too much on the sideline. It needs to become much more central, in my view.
Thank you. Catherine McKenna, any thoughts on this?
Look, I totally agree. I used to live in Indonesia and I was in Singapore. They have a big conference, Ecosperity, and just talking to the Indonesian minister, and he said, like, we need like support to actually get the projects off the ground, but it can't be that I'm paying a massive premium to borrow money, as opposed, like, I don't need your bad rates, interest rates. I can go get them myself. And so I think we need to be creative, but this is going to require governments digging deep. I see this even in Canada, where folks are like, well, it's hard enough for us at home. Well, we're actually a really rich country and we've benefited greatly from the burning of fossil fuels. And this is a global problem. We're not solving this if we don't figure this out. But I always say to the finance folks, like, I'm not a finance folk. I'm like a reformed politician and a reformed lawyer and now doing work on the policy side. But there are smart people who can figure out how to scale capital to developing countries and address for risk, whether it's currency risk. I think we overestimate political risk in many of these countries, but we need to get the trillions going. This is about scale. So of course we need governments stepping up, and grant money can help leverage private capital. So can World Bank money and Development Bank money, which is not being used as effectively as it could. But I just think we don't have time. And so really smart people have to focus on solutions, not sitting in meetings and having endless conversations about blended finance. And I think we really need to be very granular. Like, countries have ideas about what they need to do. In Canada, it was very hard phasing out coal. We had to go to communities and listen to people who were angry. And we needed to hear what they needed. They wanted investments in infrastructure. They wanted early retirement. They wanted retraining. They wanted opportunities for those communities. That's normal. That's exactly what normal people want. So as a global community, we can't go tell countries like Indonesia or Vietnam or South Africa, you've got to get off coal, but we're not worried about the transition for workers. We're just worried about how we go from coal to renewables. It won't work that way, but people are smart. We have, as I hear from finance, there's loads of money around the world. We just need to figure out ways to channel it very quickly and effectively to support politicians that are committed to doing hard things, but they can't do it if people don't have jobs, if people don't have opportunities, and if they don't get the money necessary for the transition.
Thank you, Catherine McKenna. Would you like to add anything, Johan Falk?
I think regulation will now push, basically most companies to disclose transition plans as well as countries. And you can start by doing a transition plan like a tick in a box, but when it really becomes sufficient is when you integrate in your business plan and what the countries will integrate in their financial plans. So I foresee if we can achieve that critical mass of all these actors, we can achieve a positive tipping point up to COP30. So that should be our objective.
Well, thank you very much, Johan Falk, and thank you, Catherine McKenna. And I'd like to ask Johan Rockström to stay on for the next panel. Now let's move on.